My name's Ethan, I'm 23 now. The first thing you need to know is that I never wanted this story to end in bitterness. I used to be the type who'd make excuses for others, especially my family. I'd tell myself they were just stressed, didn't mean it like that, or the old standby, they love you in their own way. But eventually, when the same wound keeps getting prodded, you stop convincing yourself it's an accident. Growing up, I was the unseen one in the Carter family. Not neglected, exactly, just inconvenient. My parents had this radiance around my younger brother, Dylan. He played soccer. He was talented, and somehow, that made everything else fade into the background. His medals had their own display case. My name's Ethan, and I'm 23 now, but this story unfolded just a few months back, when I should have been basking in pride, fulfillment, maybe even a tear or two. You know, the moment people dream of. Striding across a stage in a cap and gown. Your name ringing out while your family hollers like maniacs from the stands. That's what I imagined graduation would be. But when the day arrived, all I felt was a hollow, stinging quiet, the ache of being overlooked. Growing up, I always knew my parents had a favorite. My younger brother, Dylan, could sneeze wrong and still get applause for it. He's just so spirited, they'd say, while I was told to pipe down, even if I was just humming a tune. He played soccer, not just pickup games, but in elite leagues since he was 8, with pricey coaches, custom cleats, and tournament trips across state lines. Meanwhile, my birthday cards came with a note, "Don't spend this on comics," and a crumpled $20, like that made everything fine. Don't misunderstand. I wasn't resentful back then. Not truly. I figured if I kept my head low and worked hard, things might even out. Maybe, just once, I'd hear, "We're so proud of you, Ethan." I didn't need the stars. I didn't even crave praise, not really, just recognition. A nod that didn't feel like a chore. So I did what I was raised to do, I earned it. I studied while Dylan collected trophies. I took night shifts to afford textbooks when our college fund mysteriously vanished the moment I turned 18. I never questioned it. Never grumbled. When I got into my dream college on a scholarship, mind you, they just shrugged and said, "Well, it's not Yale." That was the first time something fractured inside me. Still, I pressed on. Years of brutal coursework, sleepless nights, instant noodles, missed holidays because I couldn't afford a bus ticket home, and they never offered to pitch in. I didn't even get birthday calls anymore, just a group text with a balloon emoji. But I clung to one thought like a lifeline: graduation day. They'll come, I told myself. They'll cheer, they'll see me in my robes and finally realize I did it. A week before the ceremony, I called Mom to confirm. She answered on speaker, Dad jumping in midway. "Ethan, we're trying, but Dylan's got a championship that weekend," she said in that lilting, guilt-laced tone. "And it's a big deal. He's worked so hard." I sat there, silent, letting her words settle. "I've worked hard too," I said finally, my voice breaking, and I hated that it did. Dad laughed, short and sharp. "You should be thanking us for covering your tuition, Ethan. We did our part, but you didn't," I said, keeping my voice even. "My scholarship paid for nearly everything, and I've been working to cover the rest." Silence. Then Dylan's voice in the background, cocky and dismissive. "Nobody cares about your name, man. Relax." I didn't reply, just hung up. My hand trembled as I put the phone down. Not with rage, not yet. Just a colder, final kind of letdown. You know that moment when a plate slips, and for a split second, it doesn't feel real? That was me, watching my hope of family support shatter on the floor. On the morning of the ceremony, I sat in my car in the campus lot for 15 minutes, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I had the cap, the gown, the little gold tassel swaying like it had its own pulse. But my smile was forced, and I knew it. My friends were meeting their families, snapping photos, shedding joyful tears. I drifted past them like a shadow. Backstage, someone handed me a program with the speaker list. I scanned it, heart pounding. My name was there. Ethan J. Carter, summa cum laude, one of only 5 students chosen to speak. I hadn't told my parents. Why would I? That title, summa cum laude, felt like a crown made of tissue, fragile, fleeting. I was supposed to stand up there and talk about grit, unity, thankfulness. The speech I'd written was tidy, safe, filled with platitudes that would make the audience nod, clap, and forget it all in 10 minutes. But standing behind that curtain, hearing the applause for the speaker before me, something inside me broke. Not loudly, not wildly, but in the quiet, permanent way a dam cracks under strain. I stepped onto the stage, took my place at the podium, and faced the crowd, hundreds of faces. None of them mine, none of them family. I saw my advisor in the front row, beaming with pride. I saw my roommate waving a tiny flag. But no mom, no dad, no Dylan, just rows of strangers clapping courteously. I waited for the applause to fade. Then I took a breath and, instead of reading from my prepared speech, I looked straight into the spotlight and said something unplanned. Something real, honest, and that's when the air shifted. Hands froze mid-clap, heads tilted, people blinked, unsure if they'd heard me correctly. Somewhere in the third row, I heard a sharp intake of breath. Because I hadn't thanked my parents, I hadn't said I was honored to represent them. I hadn't spoken about perseverance or gratitude. I'd said something else entirely, something that changed the whole mood of the ceremony and left an impression no one would forget. I stood there, heart hammering like a drum. The words were out, and there was no taking them back. I'd like to start, I said evenly, by thanking the people who aren't here today. A soft murmur spread through the auditorium, like a gust stirring still water. I could sense the faculty shifting in their seats, but I pressed on. My voice was steady. Too steady, because when you build something entirely on your own, you learn how loud absence can be, how heavy neglect feels, and how much power you can find in being underestimated. Another pause. I scanned the crowd again. Still no familiar faces, but I didn't need them anymore. My parents couldn't make it, I said simply. They had a soccer game to attend, and if you ask them, that's likely more important than watching their son graduate summa cum laude. A few uneasy laughs broke out, the kind people give when they're not sure if it's a joke. I didn't smile. They used to say I should be grateful, that I should thank them for paying my tuition, even though they didn't. They said no one cared about my name, so I hope you'll forgive me if I take a moment to say it clearly now. I leaned into the mic. My name is Ethan Carter. I worked nights, I skipped meals. I taught myself to code so I could freelance and pay rent. I turned in every assignment early. I aced every test without a single shortcut or extension. And I did it without a family rooting for me. The crowd was silent now. I wasn't shouting. I didn't need to. The pauses between my words carried the weight. I used to think love meant waiting. That if you held on long enough, people would show up. But sometimes people only show up when it suits them, when there's a photo to post, when there's a trophy to display, when there's something they can boast about over coffee. I felt the burn behind my eyes but kept it together. I'm not saying this for pity. I'm saying it because I know I'm not the only one here today who felt invisible growing up. Who had to fight for a place in their own home. Who had to cheer for themselves in empty rooms. So if you're out there feeling like no one showed up for you, let me say this. I see you. You made it, and that matters. The silence broke. Slow, steady applause started, growing louder, row by row. Not polite, not obligatory. Just raw, real clapping that swelled with recognition. I stood there, unsure how to handle it. It wasn't the applause you get for a rehearsed speech. It was the kind people give when they see their own truth reflected. I gave a small nod and stepped away from the podium. The MC looked rattled but quickly moved on to the next speaker. I didn't look back as I left the stage. I couldn't, my legs felt unsteady, and I was terrified that meeting anyone's gaze would break me. I slipped into the hallway behind the stage and pressed myself against the cold wall. I exhaled a breath I'd been holding for years. That's when my phone started buzzing. Again, and again, I pulled it out. 19 missed calls. 4 from Mom. 3 from Dad, 12 from Dylan. I hesitated, then opened the latest text. It was from Dylan. What did you just say at your graduation? People are blowing up our phones. Then another, seconds later, you made us look awful. Really? After all we've done for you. And finally, one from Mom. Ethan, we need to talk. That was completely unacceptable. I stared at the screen and let out a dry laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. They only reached out when their image took a hit. Not when I was struggling, not when I needed them. Only now, when their facade was crumbling in public. And just like that, something in me settled. It didn't hurt anymore. Not like it used to. Their approval had been a goalpost I could never reach. But now I knew, there was nothing waiting for me at the end of that chase. So I did something I never thought I'd have the strength to do. I silenced their notifications. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. And I walked out to join my friends. We took photos. We grabbed ice cream. We laughed until our sides ached. They didn't know exactly what I'd said up there, but they could tell I seemed lighter. Freer. That night, I opened my laptop and checked the university's livestream recording. My speech was already circulating. A professor I barely knew emailed me, calling it the most honest graduation speech she'd ever heard. Classmates I'd never talked to messaged me, thanking me for voicing what they'd always felt. But that wasn't the real win. The real win came 3 days later, when I checked my banking app and saw a transfer attempt labeled mortgage, Carter residence, denied. Because what they didn't know was that their house, the one they flaunted during Dylan's soccer barbecues, the one they hosted brunches in, the one with the oversized patio Dad swore was his vision, wasn't theirs. It was mine, the house. If there was ever a symbol of our family dynamic, that sprawling suburban dream was it. From the outside, it was flawless. Neat hedges, polished windows, the porch bench Mom pretended to read on. But inside, it was a monument to avoidance. A shrine to silence and control, every creak in the floorboards whispering things no one dared say aloud. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that 2 years ago, during one of Dylan's out-of-state tournaments, my parents quietly refinanced the house to cover some urgent upgrades. New siding, new garage door, and Dylan's 4th soccer camp in California that cost a small fortune. Dad thought he was slick, handling it all online to avoid paper trails. But refinancing a house with shaky credit? It's not a simple deal. Banks don't hand out favors unless someone cosigns. Guess who got the late-night call? Me, the reliable one. The one with solid credit, a steady job, and a name that could still carry weight. They asked politely, of course, said it was just temporary, that they'd bounce back soon. I remember Dad saying, "It's just a formality, Ethan. You won't feel a thing. You help us now, we'll help you later." That's family. So I signed, not because I trusted them, but because back then, I still held on to hope. The hope that if I stepped up, maybe they'd finally show up for me. That if I gave, I'd finally be more than a backup plan. Of course, that help never came, and over time, those temporary months turned into a pattern. I noticed small withdrawals from my account. Subtle at first, just 100 here or there, easy to overlook if I wasn't paying attention. But after the second year, when I'd saved enough from freelance coding to pay off the remaining mortgage, I made a quiet choice. I transferred the title to my name, completely legal. They hadn't read the fine print. They thought it was just another refinance form. They didn't realize that when they missed 3 months of payments, I became the sole owner. It wasn't about vengeance then. Honestly, I just wanted to protect myself. I knew the longer I stayed financially tied to them, the more they'd lean on me like a safety net. Like a spare tire they could slash when things got tough. But after that graduation text, after the arrogance, the deflection, the nerve, something shifted. That transfer attempt, labeled mortgage, Carter residence? It was the breaking point. A quiet reminder that even after my speech, they still didn't get it. They still expected me to be the dutiful son. The silent bankroller. The shadow funding their illusions. I didn't respond. I didn't call back. Instead, I logged into the account tied to the property, checked the terms. They'd missed the last 2 payments. Like clockwork, I waited a week. Then I sent the first letter. Formal, stamped, slipped neatly into the mailbox on that pristine porch. Notice of ownership transfer, effective immediately. It was concise, clean, and legally bulletproof. It informed the occupants of the deed change and requested that any further financial or residential arrangements be made through the listed owner. Me, no theatrics, no sentiment. Just facts. I didn't hear from them for 2 days, then the calls came again. I let them go to voicemail. Mom's voice wavered between fury and desperation. "Ethan, this isn't a game. This is our home. You can't just, what are you thinking?" Dad's message was colder, sharper. "Don't push me, son. You think a document changes anything? We raised you." But it was Dylan's voicemail that made me chuckle. "You need to stop this now. What's your deal, man? You've always been jealous, always had that chip on your shoulder, but this is low. You're really destroying our lives over a missed graduation?" As if that was the issue. As if the missed ceremony was the start and not just the spark that lit the fuse, I didn't answer. Instead, I drafted an email. Not emotional, not biting. Just clear. I listed every time I'd covered their expenses, attached proof of the payment history. Highlighted the default clauses they'd violated. And at the end, I added one final line. "You have 30 days to vacate or propose an agreement for continued tenancy. Failure to respond will result in legal action." I hit send, and then, I waited. Every hour felt like the quiet before a storm I'd finally learned to anticipate. But it wasn't the legal action that shook them, it was what I said the night before those proceedings officially started. The moment I walked up that familiar path, rang the doorbell on the house I now owned, and stood face to face with the people who never thought I'd matter enough to stand my ground. That's when everything truly began to unravel. The knock wasn't loud, but it carried weight. I stood on the porch, my porch, watching shadows move behind the etched glass. For a moment, nothing stirred. Then I saw Dad's familiar outline, shoulders braced like he was ready for a fight he thought he'd win with sheer force. He cracked the door open. His face shifted, shock, annoyance, something else he didn't bother to mask. "So, you finally showed up." I didn't waver. "I sent the letter. I gave you 30 days. He gave a sharp, humorless laugh. "You think this is how family works? With threats?" I held his gaze, steady. "You abandoned your version of family long ago. This is just the paperwork catching up." He stepped aside just enough for me to see inside. The house looked unchanged, but it felt smaller. Like the walls were tightening around years of half-truths and flimsy excuses. Mom sat on the sofa, arms folded, jaw set. She didn't speak, just shot me that look she saved for when she wanted to say "I'm disappointed" without wasting words. Dylan lounged by the staircase, still in some soccer tracksuit like he was headed to practice and couldn't be bothered. He didn't look at me. He looked past me, like I was a stray breeze stirring up dust. I stepped inside, not because I wanted to, but because this time, I had the upper hand, legally and emotionally. "I'm not here to fight," I said calmly. "I'm here to settle things." "Settle?" Dylan snorted. "You're unreal. You're really going to kick out your family over a speech? Because we skipped your big moment?" I turned to face him fully. "No, Dylan. I'm evicting you because for 4 years, I was an afterthought. Because this house was a cash machine for your soccer camps while I worked 2 jobs to stay in school. Because I was the fallback when your parents needed a signature but not a son, and now, I'm the owner. So yes, this is me settling things." Dad stepped forward, like he might get between us. "This isn't how it's done, Ethan. You don't cut off family over a few mistakes." "Mistakes," I repeated, voice low. "You mean like telling me to be grateful for tuition you never paid? Like dismissing me for expecting you at graduation? Like calling me jealous for refusing to stay quiet?" No one responded, so I went on. "I gave you every chance. I let you use my name, my credit, my trust. And when I finally stood up for myself, you tried to guilt me for it." Mom stood now, her voice trembling, not with sorrow, but with barely contained anger. "We did our best. It wasn't perfect, but this is heartless." "You're not being punished," I said. "You're being held accountable. There's a difference." I pulled out the folder I'd brought and handed it to Dad. Inside are 2 options. One is a buyout agreement. You can purchase the house back at market value. A local appraiser did the valuation, it's all there. He didn't take the folder. So I placed it on the coffee table. The second is a rental agreement. You pay market rent, monthly, on my terms. If that's not acceptable, I'll file for eviction next week. Dylan lost it. "You're twisted, man. You think you're above us now? Because you gave some dramatic speech?" I looked at him, really looked at him. "No, Dylan, I'm not above you. I just stopped letting you treat me like I was beneath you." I turned to leave. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't expect it. But as I reached the door, Dad said, "You'll regret this one day." I paused, not out of doubt. Just to let it sink in. I turned back and said, "No, I regret not doing it sooner." And with that, I walked out. Down the steps, across the lawn, through the gate. 3 days later, the silence broke, not with anger, but with defeat. Dad called. His voice was worn, brittle. "We'll sign the rental agreement," he said. "We can't afford to buy it back right now." I kept it professional. "Once the lease is signed and the deposit clears, I'll send the keys. Any delays will be treated as non-compliance." The papers were signed within the week. For the first time in my life, I had boundaries. Real ones, enforced not by guilt, not by duty, but by my own will. They paid rent. On time, quietly, no more smug texts. No more lectures about gratitude. Just monthly payments from people who once mocked my name, and me. I moved across town into a small apartment. Nothing lavish, but it was mine. No echoes of the past. No one belittling my efforts. Just peace. I kept working. I started a small app development business. It grew slowly, then steadily. Turns out, when you're not weighed down by emotional baggage, you can build something real. I didn't block them, but I didn't chase them either. One day, about 6 months later, I got a voicemail from Dylan. It was brief, unusually subdued. "Hey, saw your startup feature online. Looks like you're doing okay, just wanted to say that." I didn't reply, not out of malice, but because I didn't need anything from him anymore. Not approval, not praise, not apologies. I'd finally stopped waiting for my name to matter in their world, because I'd built a world of my own, where it already did.